To what extent is the Quagmire Theory, suggesting that the US mistakenly led itself into the Vietnam War, an accurate representation of post-World War II US decision-making in the Indo-Chinese region? The Quagmire Theory accurately depicts the nature of US decision-making from the 1947 introduction of the foreign policy of containment until the first wave of US combat troops arrived in Vietnam in 1965. The Quagmire Theory suggests the US never intended to participate in a war against North Vietnam, and instead US leadership, through a series of individually small decisions, ended up consequently fighting a war. Quagmire, meaning an awkward, complex, or hazardous situation, has remained the title of this theory since the publishing of David Halberstam's 1965 book on the USA's involvement in Vietnam, titled The Making of a Quagmire. Throughout this text, the validity of the Quagmire Theory will be argued for. From the conclusion of the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's major superpowers. This caused tensions globally due to the ideological divide between the two nations' economic systems, with the US operating under capitalism and the Soviet Union under communism. As a result, the US adopted the foreign policy of containment, or the Truman Doctrine, in 1947. Its name is derived from a speech delivered by Truman in 1947, where he asked Congress to support free peoples who were resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. In effect, this policy resulted in America supporting any force fighting a communist group to ideally contain the spread of communism. The adoption of this policy corresponded with the French re-entering Vietnam after World War II, starting the First Indo-Chinese War. Despite the fact that the French were fighting to re-establish their colony, and the Viet Minh were fighting for the right to independently inhabit the land they had lived in for thousands of years, the US supported the French in this conflict financially from 1950 to 1954. As the Viet Minh coalition was founded by Ho Chi Minh and the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, the US became increasingly concerned if the French colonizers were defeated, Vietnam would be freed to align politically with the Soviet Union and Mao Zedong's Chinese Communist Party. Resultingly, the US, through the Mutual Defense Assistance Act, began financially supporting the French in their war effort. This continued throughout the length of the war, with the USA's rationale to support the French summarized in the 1953 to 1960 US President Dwight D. Eisenhower's domino theory. If one country, in Asia, fell to communism, the surrounding countries would fall, like dominoes. By the time the Battle of Dien Bien Phu effectively ended the First Indo-Chinese War, the effort to establish a colony had cost $3 billion USD, with America paying for over a third of that. After the conclusion of the war, the US remained active in Vietnamese politics, rejecting the Geneva Accord splitting Vietnam by the 17th parallel, as did communist-led Vietnam. The US rejected it as the accord stated an election for a new governing body for the entirety of Vietnam would occur after 2 years, and the US expected Vietnamese communists to win this. Following rejecting this, they heavily supported the Vietnamese politician Ngo Dinh Diem, propping him into the position of the President of the South of Vietnam. Ngo Dinh Diem had lived in the US priorly and was anti-communism and Christian, making him an attractive candidate to lead Vietnam to the USA. North and South tensions in Vietnam were perpetuated under Diem's rule, with him rigging elections to suggest that the North Vietnamese communists were unpopular, and his brutal treatment of the many Buddhists in Vietnam prompted several attempted coups. Eventually, Diem was assassinated in 1963 with CIA approval. Despite his assassination taking place in a coup led by South Vietnamese working with the US, the fragility of South Vietnam was exposed here. Diem's aggressive actions ensured a war between the North and the South would occur, which was clearly not what the US expected nor wanted, given their approval for the coup against him. With the Communists now poised to defeat the weaker South and unify Vietnam as one communist nation, the President Lyndon B. Johnson was forced to halt the spread of communism by sending in American combat troops to fight the Viet Cong. This signals the unofficial start of the Second Indo-Chinese War. The US, from the 1950s onwards, chose to act on their foreign policy of containment and provide political, military, and financial support to fight the spread of communism in Vietnam. However, due to unforeseen circumstances with the French being unexpectedly defeated by the far less developed Viet Minh, the US fighting communism in Vietnam became an unsuccessful and costly effort. This was made worse after their support of the brutal Ngo Dinh Diem, who inadvertently gave the North Vietnamese greater reason to retaliate against the South and establish communism throughout Vietnam. This placed the US in a quagmire by the mid 1960s, with their options to allow Vietnam to fall to communism or to send American combat troops directly to fight the Communist North. Despite their reluctance to do so up to this point, this pushed the US to finally decide to send in American troops and start the Vietnamese War, as their fear of domino theory surpassed their fear of the waste of many American lives. This series of events validifies the Quagmire Theory, as it shows the Americans only began fighting in Vietnam once they had mistakenly ensured a war would occur in which there was no substantial force they could fund to fight communism for them.